Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to day one of our week-long lunchtime webinar series marking National Housing Day week. As people begin to trick in, we're going to start with our member impact video. You can roll the tape.
It's the mission of the Urban Land Institute to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact. That's what we do at ULI Toronto. Our members work in all aspects of land use.
ULI is a catalyst. It's a catalyst for people who in themselves are thought-provoking, are interesting, they're purposeful, they're engaged, and they want to have an impact on the world.
The Toronto region is definitely a stronger, more robust place because of the championship role that the Urban Land Institute Toronto has played in elevating the status of women in the industry.
Our industry has a responsibility to meaningfully contribute to the social fabric of our communities and to be a climate change leader.
In Toronto, ULI helps deliver climate change and resiliency that is equitable and valuable.
ULI Toronto help mid-career professionals reach the next stage of their careers as city builders.
ULI Toronto is an entry point and a launching pad for our next generation of leaders to find their place in this very complex industry.
ULI Toronto brings global best practices to our city and shows our city's innovations to the world of real estate.
ULI creates really good conversations about important public policy subjects for our members.
It brings leading developers across our city together to wrestle with the crisis of affordability. We need solutions for our industry, tenants, and new home buyers alike.
The ULI network is incredibly effective in bringing in key stakeholders to build solutions to support Black communities.
I'm proud to work alongside ULI in seeking to accelerate accessibility and ensure that our built environments meet everyone's needs for access.
ULI Toronto is well positioned to help the real estate and development industry identify opportunities to meet a generational need to advance truth, justice, and reconciliation.
ULI demonstrates the unique power in leveraging the built environment, whether that's private real estate development or public infrastructure, for the benefit of a more competitive and equitable city.
I am so excited as ULI Chair to celebrate these positive solutions that our real estate development community has brought forward for Toronto.
At ULI Toronto, we connect, we inspire, and we lead.
Once again, good afternoon. That membership video is your invitation to get more involved in the world's largest and most active ULI chapter. A few notes to you all that you can, through a membership, you can access our global membership directory. There are many exciting opportunities to get involved with ULI through the Navigator portal. You can also access the Knowledge Finder feature, which is an incredible resource of case studies going back nearly 80 years in North America and around the world. More details of that will be found in the chat. And you'll also notice that this year, ULI is significantly increasing our member-only programming, including more tours and educational opportunities, as well as the weekly roundup newsletter of the industry stories you can't afford to miss, as well as a single source for all ULI Toronto events. If you only have time to open up one ULI email a week, this is the one you want to open up. For those of you who are not members, though, you don't get this, so you need to be a member to open up fewer emails. Another thing is a new monthly breakfast, as you just saw one, but these are three more, that is now a feature for members only. Senior public officials is the program we have coming up in the new year. We have, first of all, Michael Krajewek is going to be who's the chair of the Ontario Land Tribunal, the OLT, is coming up in December. But in January, we have Jag Sharma, Deputy City Manager, Development and Growth Services at the City of Toronto. In February, Phil Verster, CEO of Metrolinx. And in March, Michael Fetishin, CEO of the Building Ontario Fund. And then more coming after that. So this is a monthly series for members only that you will not want to miss. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Joy. I'm the Executive Director of ULI Toronto. Before we get into this, as always, we begin with a land acknowledgement, which will be posted. But in lieu of reading this today, I want to speak briefly about how we're putting meaning behind this statement as ULI Toronto seeks to explore truth and reconciliation at the intersection of real estate and development. For several years, ULI has worked with a cohort of industry leaders along with our partner Shared Path to navigate this space. In doing so, we've produced numerous educational programs and other information that you will find online, and that link will be posted in the chat. We have showcased real estate companies who are developing their own truth and reconciliation strategies, as well as spotlighting Indigenous leadership talent in our industry, both here in Toronto and across Canada. This past fall, we hosted our first sold-out Indigenous Cultural Competency course, and we'll be convening more of these opportunities in the new year, so look out for those. And just last week, we hosted Councillor Larry Salt, former Chief and Grand Chief, who represented the recently elected Chief and Council of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations at a special members-only event at Airdon Bearless. Our journey has only just begun, and we invite you all to join us in what is proving to be a most meaningful and valuable pursuit. Next, I would say that today's event and all other ULI programming would simply not be possible without the support of our annual sponsors. And to those sponsors, we'd like to say again, thank you. Now more than ever, ULI relies on the support of our sponsors to put on high quality programs and to drive our mission to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. To all of them again, we say a great deal of thanks. Okay, once again, welcome to day one of our week-long series, Broadening the Affordable Housing Discussion. This is our third annual series, marking National Housing Day, which falls this Friday this year. And this year, we are seeking to explore the focuses that have not received as much attention in the discussion of solving Canada's housing crisis, or more specifically, Canada's national affordable housing crisis. Today's session very much exemplifies a perspective that I feel requires more consideration, having read our guest's new book, Broken City, this past summer. Patrick Condon's thesis that we must better understand the drivers of land value escalation to understand the affordability crisis in Canada and indeed across the international Anglosphere really struck me. In short, he makes a great case in a very well-documented book that he'll be speaking to us today, followed by an interview with Cerise Berta, member and researcher with the National Affordable Action Council. So let's get on with it. And as always, our speaker bios will be in the chat. And with that, Patrick, we will stop sharing our slides and you can share yours, and we'll hand it over to you before we bring in Cerise.
All right. Let's see if I can get this up. There we go. And away we go. Hopefully.
Yeah, it works.
There, thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, and thanks for the invitation from ULI. I very much appreciate it. Hello from the West Coast. In the next couple of minutes, I'll go through the basic, summary of the book Broken City. And we'll be able to follow that up with some conversation because I think this is a very crucial issue that we're all aware of. For me, the bottom line of this presentation and the book is the problem with the affordable housing issue is it's not the building that costs too much, it's the land under the building that costs too much. And it wouldn't be really a problem if it weren't for the fact that adding density inflates land price, or technically the land price residual. So it's very difficult for density, perhaps impossible, for adding density to get ahead of the increase in land price, which tends to reflect whatever capacity that square foot of dirt can produce in terms of square feet of interior space is really what sets the price. Excuse me. Disclaimer, I'm an empiricist, not a theorist. Hang on a second. I make no claims to theoretical understanding of the real estate economics, but what I do make a claim in terms of my own career is 40 years of creating sustainable and hopefully affordable communities. And my frustration over that period has been that, like many perhaps who are listening in, your best efforts to produce affordable housing become thwarted by a market that seems to resist all of our efforts to supply housing at a price that's affordable to our average citizen. Anyway, my training was in landscape architecture originally. I was a planner for a number of years. I had planner in Massachusetts. And perhaps my orientation towards land has been given me a particular insight that I have concluded it's always about urban land and how it absorbs the value of all our good works above. No matter what we try to do in terms of creating a good city, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector, somehow all of our collective efforts get bound up in the price of the dirt over time. So for me, it all starts with a simple question that even a landscape architect like me can handle. Since Economics 101 says that if you add enough housing supply to existing urban districts, home prices will drop. We're hearing this at the national level, at pretty much every province. Ontario and BC are strident in this respect, saying that the problem is that we're not producing enough supply in our existing urban districts. And if we only would add supply, home prices will drop. That's the question. Unfortunately, if that was true, why then didn't add tons of new density to existing neighborhoods in Vancouver lead to lower prices? As many of you probably know, Vancouver is world famous for something called Vancouverism, which was among its ideas, affordability being one of them. Another one was high density done well, with a lot of public amenities and the restoration of a center city in a modern new city that is unparalleled around the world. Vancouver was first out of the gate with high rises in the downtown. Our center city is predominantly residential now. That was first in North America for sure to do that. So we added supply to fix this problem. In Vancouver, kept racing ahead of home price inflation by adding supply. This is an effort that I and hundreds of others participated in. So we're all very frustrated that over that course of adding incredible supply, we tripled housing units citywide in 1970, but it did not lead to affordability. This is a famous picture, of course, of that change, but what is less understood is that throughout the city, in the so-called single-family zones, we also more than doubled density on average in those zones as well during that same period. So this is the chart that shows it. We doubled population. Actually, we only increased population by 74%, but that's pretty good. Doubled density and tripled housing units citywide since 1970. And this is all through infill. There were no unoccupied sites in the city of Vancouver in 1970. So no other North American center city came close to this achievement. And I'll give you more detail on that in a moment. But before we get to that, the horrifying picture of what that period has transpired, what has transpired during that period. Very complicated chart, very informative. You might want to study it at your leisure, but what the two lines I want to bring your attention to now are the brown line on the bottom, which is inflation adjusted wages, and the blue line, the dark blue line, which is inflation adjusted housing prices within the city. Again, this tripling of housing units, no other North American city came close except for Toronto within its original confines. And we can maybe discuss that later as well, because your situation is a parallel to Vancouver in many respects. So in order to put some teeth into this claim of mine that we have done better than any other place in North America, we produced these empirical charts from census data, and I highlight two cities in North America just for comparative sake. One is Vancouver on the far left, and as you see, compared to all the other center cities that we looked at in North America, and there were scores of them, Vancouver has done the best job of infill density of any other city. I don't want to say by far, because Toronto is sort of a close second, but on the average, it's done a better job by far than the average North American city of adding density. San Francisco, highlighted to the right, only a 30% increase in density. Similarly, New York and Los Angeles, only a 30% increase in the number of housing units in the city. This chart takes the same information, I'll move to the highlighted one, and shows you again San Francisco and Vancouver with additional information layered in. That additional information layered in is average household income, shown as a ratio between average household income and median home price in the city. So on those two criteria, you see that Vancouver charts the absolute highest for the disparity between home prices and average incomes, household incomes, and on the other axis, unparalleled, particularly in comparison with American cities, which are in the blue, for its increase in housing units within city limits. Also, the size of the bubbles indicates that average density in the city. So Vancouver does very well in the Canadian context, with only exceeded by the original footprint of Toronto before its amalgamation with its suburban districts, which is the parameter we used here. But the disparity in home prices is relative to incomes is quite a bit more severe in Vancouver than it is in Toronto and anywhere else in North America. It's a crisis. So it raises the question, which my book tries to attack. I've done more than a couple books, and all of them, except for this one, have been about creating urban designs for sustainable city. But the severity of the housing crisis has turned my attention in what will probably be my last book because of my gray hair, towards the housing issue. And I tried to answer the question: if adding new density, new supply brought down prices, Vancouver should have the cheapest housing in North America. If this were true, it has the most expensive. To put this in a larger global frame, this is not just a Canadian problem, not just a Vancouver problem, but this is a global problem. One interesting indicator of this is the amount of wealth that is tied up in this case, in this example, American urban land, and where it's red, the land values are in the trillions. And of course, you see this correlates with where the cities are. There's been a huge movement globally of land value generally towards urban locations. And the more successful those urban locations are, the higher is this exaggerated inflation of land. Now, this map is geographically correct, but there's one that follows up that shows it in terms of the preponderance of investment. And I'll just let you ponder this, which I have done in my weaker, more depressed moments, to show you where the massive concentration of real estate wealth in urban land. To the point of the difficulty of diluting that land value component when you add density, survey of the assessor's maps in the city of Vancouver leads to an alarming conclusion that even when comparing single-family homes, which the top chart shows you, with a much higher density building, which the lower chart shows you, that generally in our city, we see a 10-to-1 difference in the value of the building, which according to assessors records stays essentially flat, compared with the value of the land shown in the blue line, which has shown dramatic increases during, the past 15 years now, with a peak in 2016. So we have land values many times higher than building value, but they're unaffordable in either case because the constant seems to be the price per square foot of the market price per square foot of the eventual building, and that drives the land price residual for the square foot of dirt underneath the building. So-called value per square foot of the dirt, the price per buildable, in quotes. Oversimplified diagram, I love it anyway. Before the rezoning, land price 1 million. After rezoning, land price up to 4 million. We have empirical information that shows that this is true, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more even. So in terms of the ability of density to dilute that land price component, it seems we have been frustrated. Simple diagram showing on the left, in your city and many places, the government is saying if we just remove taxes and if we just remove planning controls, it will lead to more affordability. But the evidence seems to suggest that if you do remove development taxes on infrastructure requirements and in our city community amenity contributions and so forth, the result tends to be largely an increase in land price residual with no significant improvement in the price to the buyer or the rent necessary to amortize the building that goes to the renter. So what do we do? I'm making the claim that the preponderant argument that is international, that is being leveled now pretty much everywhere that has this problem, and that is among many, many global cities, particularly in the Anglosphere. What is being suggested by almost, well, I don't want to say almost everybody, but pretty much the dominant rhetoric now is that if we just remove planning controls and allow density to go everywhere, and if we just removed all taxes and development controls, that would lead to increased affordability. The empirical data does not support that. So once we get to the point of accepting my complaint or my charge, the question arises, what can we do? Because we need to somehow control this land price inflation if we can through public policy. And the best solution in the North American context, and there are a number, the Vancouver Community Amenity Contribution, which asked for a very large tax in effect on the building and then uses that money for social betterment, including affordable housing, is one way to reduce the land price residual that the market is driving. That's one example. Another example that maybe has more relevance globally is this one that the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts implemented. And in Cambridge, it's the Cambridge, Massachusetts Affordable Housing Overlay. They basically said, for this entire city, anywhere in the city you want a double density, you can. So if your FSR is 1, you can go to 2. If your FSR is 3, you can go to 6. If your FSR is 0.7, you can go to 1.5 and so forth. But only if you agree to have 100% affordable housing. Now, in the American circumstance, that affordable definition is quite precise in comparison to our own Canadian example, which is pretty loose. The American definition is that 30% of the median regional income would constitute the level of affordability. That level and below are considered technically affordable. So the units that are produced in this, and they would largely be produced by non-government organizations, but a lot of development corporations have NGO arms in Cambridge, and I know that they exist certainly in Canada, and there are a large number. Anyway, the non-government organization is the likely developer of these projects that are required to hold to that level of affordability in perpetuity. Now that's tied to regional income. So as regional income goes up, so too do the rents in these projects. So it creates a direct connection between regional wages and the regional habitation price, shelter price, basically. And they've had a number of projects, not enough to solve the problem, I must say, but they've had a number of projects, and it's one thing that I can put on the table as a recommendation. In the book, there are a number of other recommendations that come from around the world, some of them Canadian, the community amenity contribution that I've talked about that successfully captured 80% of the increased value of the land underneath the dramatic projects in Yaletown and in our downtown and in other parts of our city. They captured 80% of the new value of that land and used most of that for social benefit within the development districts, which of course included affordable housing, not enough affordable housing, unfortunately, but it included affordable housing, park space, infrastructure, and all those kinds of things. Both those strategies, and they are different, both those strategies result in the same consequence, however. They reduce the inflationary tendency of upzoning to just thwart your affordability objectives by inflating land price, either in the short term or in the long term. So the concluding statement from me today is don't just upzone hoping for affordability, which is generally what we're doing these days, but insist on it. And by insisting on it, you end up getting the same sort of market result. The only downside is that, I mean, the only downside is if you happen to be in the land speculation arm of this real estate clown car that we happen to be in now, then your profit levels will be hopefully much reduced. As some of you in this seminar probably know, that the real gains in real estate these days are coming from acquiring land at a lower value and then either holding it or rezoning it or doing something with it to capitalize on its new potential value. That's the land side of it, which is quite different than the building side. In my view, of course, the building is a 100% social good. That's beautiful. That's what makes cities great, is building. So that side of it is good. What is not good is the land price inflation that comes consequent to the good work of putting that building up and the good work of policymakers and citizens creating a great city. So I'll leave it at that and turn it over to others to take it the rest of the way through.
Hi there. Thanks, Patrick. I'm scratching away. I had a whole list of questions and you have answered a lot of them, but I'm going to pull on a couple threads. And first of all, just starting with where you left off, you know, the issue of in recent years, there's been such a focus on reducing costs, as you say, as the solution to affordability. So taxes, cutting the GST on new housing, as well as development charges, the approvals process, gatekeepers, that this is the key to affordability, or at least improving supply. So I have two questions on that. First of all, based on what you're saying, what is driving this policy agenda? And could it be possible that cutting these costs can lead to some reduction in housing costs? Because if you look at a lot of cities that are already built out, like Vancouver and Toronto, that opportunity to intervene at the point of upzoning or at the point of rezoning, as you describe, is kind of the horse has left the barn in most of these built up areas and cities. So could it be the case that, reducing the cost is kind of one of the only instruments left in trying to cut the prices of new supply? And how could you do that and reach end users with those reductions?
Yeah, well, that's my whole disappointed conclusion, that when you reduce those taxes and when you smooth the development process, the benefit to that goes largely to the land speculator or to the land itself, which is the opposite of what you want, because at the end of the day, the square foot of interior space ends up costing the unaffordable number that you were trying to get around. Again, the beneficiary seems to be the landowner. Now you talk about the horse getting out of the barn. That's true. I mean, I think we've already gone a long way down in the wrong direction. I mean, Cambridge did not upzone, although they're anticipating doing that at the same time that they're doing this affordable housing overlay, because they're driven by the same political pressures that you're talking about, that I've identified. Third point to make is that if you can't do something about the land price inflationary effects, then don't do the wrong thing. If you can't do something about the land price inflationary effects, don't take public money that you would have got in development taxes away from the public and put it in the pocket of the land speculator. That makes no sense at all. That's not going to help. Now, what would help probably is if you found a way, like Cambridge did, or the land value, the community amenity contribution, which was basically a land lift tax. If you can find ways to restrain land price inflation, that would be a good time to, at the same time, create some of these efficiencies around building costs and permitting and smoothing. Those things would be helpful if you could control land price inflation, so that the benefit would go to the renter or the purchaser rather than to the land speculator.
So pretty much every policymaker in Canada and globally in the Anglosphere, as you've described, has adopted a supply-based approach to affordability. And yes, we need more housing supply, but there is the housing supply will solve affordability. And so a couple questions, one is general. It's like, why is this the mantra? Are policymakers just not reading your book? What is the assumption around this? And what is the evidence for their assumption? Like, there has to be, like, you've posed some really staggering evidence of how this hasn't worked in Vancouver. And some might say Vancouver is an anomaly, that it was an early adopter of density, as you illustrate. In the 1970s, it started with Vancouverism, where most cities were just sitting with parking lots. So could it be that it's staggering place on that graph where housing prices kind of are so high along with density. Are policymakers just kind of like setting aside Vancouver and saying like that's a whole different animal? There is evidence to show that supply will translate into affordability.
All right, on this one, I have to say the book has got chapters on trying to answer this confounding question. So the book basically says the reason why there are so many people giving an answer which is opposite to the evidence, in my view, is because we're in a long period of assuming economic realities in a certain way, and that certain way is a way, and it goes by various names, neoliberalism or neoclassical economic theory, that has unfortunately embedded the land question together with the building question, or in broader terms, the land issue has been brought in to the question of labor and capital as just another form of capital. So we are generally unfamiliar with seeing land as a separate factor of production, which is what Adam Smith originally identified. Adam Smith famously said that there are three factors of production. There is labor, there is capital, and there is land. And unfortunately, he said that if you don't watch it, land is going to absorb every bit of the new capital created by the cooperation, the collaboration between the worker and the capitalist in this, what I consider to be this magical consequence of the collaboration between labor and capital. I mean, the example I use with my students is the cappuccino barista who makes the cappuccino is only using $1.50 worth of material, and yet the thing is sold for $5. So there's like a $3.50 increase in the amount of money the world has in that moment as a consequence of the collaboration between labor and capital. But the problem is in our cities is that $3.50 is increasingly going into the dirt, into the price of the real estate underneath. And it's not the building, it's actually the location which is sucking in all that value, expressed in the sale prices of this, the value of the sale prices of this land in measure, not to what dirt is valued at, but rather the productive capacity or the rent value of that dirt. So in Vancouver, our rent value of the dirt, if you have to add the taxes to it, the rent value of the raw rent value of the residual of that dirt is somewhere between $600 and $1,000 per square foot. So anyway, that's what Adam Smith says is the issue. And I'm confounded because to me, this seems so obvious. And it's not just Vancouver, it's Sydney, it's Melbourne, it's New York now, it's San Francisco. It's a lot of places that have this exact issue staring them in the face. And the more dramatically this issue stares them in the face, the more likely politically they are to go in the absolute wrong direction. They're removing development charges where they should be increasing them, because the consequence of increasing them would be to lower land price residual, and then that would give the public the ability to use those monies towards social betterment, which the Vancouver example illustrates is perfectly legal and doesn't interfere with the developer's opportunity to build the building. What it interferes with is the landowner's opportunity to speculate on the land.
Okay, so I just want to go back to the land price residual. You had a slide in your presentation. I don't know how easy it is for you to pull that back up again, because that part is really fascinating in your book. I think it's really crucial to your central thesis. And it would be interesting, I think, to this audience, I think really gets this. A lot of the audience are developers, but some of them aren't, and they might not know what you mean by land price residual. And just to put in the context, you know, we, as you say, people are now, policymakers, housing affordability advocates are saying, look, you just have to get rid of DCs. There are well-respected economists in Canada who are saying, you know, they've increased in Toronto 10x since 2010, that GST on home construction will exceed $6 billion in 2024. That Toronto Star ran a really interesting article where it broke down the different costs to build a condo. Hard costs were somewhere around 37%, DC's 8%, and land was 7.5 to 10%. So I'm going back to this argument that can you extract from a diminishing stack of opportunities to save from, you know, things like land approvals to reduce those costs. And maybe, so I think it's helpful to understand how that gets absorbed into the land price residual, that it actually, if you take away some of those pieces from your tower of costs, it doesn't make its way to the home buyer or the renter.
Well, on the statistic 7% for land, on that one that I've seen that one from the Toronto context, if you add the 7% to the tax drain, which is basically what that reduces the land price residual in the way that I'm talking about, you're at the 15 to 20% level, but that's for a high rise, and the high rise has additional costs associated with it that make it more expensive as type. But why the high rise is a favored solution to this affordability issue is in part because that lets you escape the kinds of 50% of your project costs are actually land costs if you're doing FSR 2 versus FSR 8 or something like that, if you know what I'm saying. So you have to factor that in. And to the point of respected economists, I'm not an economist, but I do go back to what Adam Smith said, and there's a whole chapter in my book about this, how the trend from classical economics to neoclassical economics, which is where we are now, conflated capital with land. And instead of Adam Smith saying there's 3 factors of production, now there's only 2. And within the economics, within the academic or professional economics discipline, their training and their point of view still conflates the land with as capital versus the building as capital. They're conflated, whereas the classical economics position would be, and this includes a guy named Henry George, who became quite famous, focusing just on this issue. The conflation of those two make it very difficult for trained economists or politicians or all of us who are swimming in this economic landscape of neoclassical capitalism to recognize that land is fundamentally different from the building on top of it. And there's entirely too much focus on the costs of the building and almost no focus on what efficiencies at the building level create at the land value level, and the increases at the land value level thwart your ability to put out a product that is at a price that's affordable to your average wage earners. We must all remember that this problem would not be so horrible if wages, inflation adjusted, had climbed anything like the price of housing, right? It wouldn't matter. But for a separate set of reasons, salaries throughout the world in the total Anglosphere, if you want to limit it to that, have stayed essentially flat, while the value of all assets, including dominantly urban land. That's why I showed the picture of that crazy map of the United States, so you could see, so that you could viscerally experience what is really happening here, which is not being attended to. So yeah, I mean, I'm not an economist. I've got a lot of experience, and I worked hard on trying to figure this out. And I'm not a majority voice, but I just got mad enough about what was being said that I just had to write this book.
Okay, so what are some ways that we can decouple the land and capital conflation problem? What does that look like? You do outline, you know, some solutions in your book, and maybe you could top line some of those for us to achieve affordability, keeping in mind that we do have a lot of urban land that is already inflated. But we do have, you know, cities such as Toronto that are upzoning. We're in the process of upzoning for transit-oriented development.
That's the horse getting out of the barn, but go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe just, you know, we're in different stages throughout our cities and communities. So maybe just top line some of the ways that we can get in front of the barn door and ways that we can get, you know, bring the horse back.
Well, I think it's a tragedy that you're upzoning. Vancouver is also upzoning by its own volition, and also by the insistence of the province, in our case, with three bills, which has basically gotten rid of all planning, essentially. I mean, 80% of urban land is residential. So our situation now is all of that has been thrown out. That the local municipalities will not have any authority over where the tower goes, essentially. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but not by much. You know, in this atmosphere, I mean, all I can say is that don't do it. I mean, if you're considering upzoning this year, don't do it. Think about it. In Calgary, they're thinking about it. They narrowly passed the citywide rezoning, upzoning. The arguments against it were much like the arguments that I'm making. We will see what happens in the next election, but this has become a political issue there, and I suspect it will become a political issue in other places pretty soon. Because there are, you know, I find at the grassroots level, people understand what I'm talking about a whole lot easier than the people at the sort of academic real estate economics level, or the policy discussion that's taking place at various levels of government. They don't seem to understand what I'm talking about, but the average citizen does. And you know, in the case of Calgary, as an example, the average citizen does not buy the argument that just getting rid of zoning is going to make homes affordable for their sons and daughters and the service workers we need to keep our city running. It's just not going to happen. And that's their belief, and it's also my belief. But it's astonishing that at the higher levels, I'm sorry, but a dumb guy like me, you know, sitting here watching this clown car over the past 40 years, and you know, actually analyzing the data. It seems impossible that they're all wrong, but it seems like they are all wrong.
Okay, I'm gonna ask, I think, one last question, and then I think, Richard, there's a lot of burning questions in the chat. So which one? So I think it's important to point out that you are pro-density, that you state in your book, adding new density to existing districts is good for many reasons: transit, walkability, efficient infrastructure, greenhouse gas emissions. But if affordability is your number one objective for making this change, there are better ways to achieve it. So can you sort of leave off our conversation with, just a couple examples of how zoning has led to social benefit, like affordable housing? And then secondly, if you're trying to capture the land lift, at the point of zoning or upzoning, you make the statement that there's a distinction between how that would impact, say, the developer who is building a social good and speculation. So maybe if you could describe, so those examples of where zoning has worked for the benefit, and how examples such as that could distinguish between, penalizing developers or capturing speculation.
Yeah, it's kind of two separate questions there. I've got like 5 or 6 books out there. 4 of the 5 were about the benefits of adding density to create sustainable communities. And of course, I still believe that, and that academic focus on that, not just academic, but practical as well, as working with communities. Early in my career, I got the first BC sustainable community of East Clayton built, facilitating that with the city of Surrey. I don't take total credit for that by any means, but I did facilitate that to the point of walkability and transit friendly and, all these things, and adding rental suites to the lower floor as well as on the lane. All those things have been advanced by me, and I still, of course, hold those to be true. Unfortunately, the problem now is that the ability of planning to actually achieve those things has been undercut by this rage to get rid of basically planning. That's what it amounts to. No more planning. Buildings of any density can go anywhere at the extreme end of this polemic, and that seems to be the dominant one, will lead to affordability. And on the way to that affordability, we need to get rid of planning, which could have, in my view, which has, in the case of Vancouver region, created a more walkable, more transit-friendly, more diverse metropolitan area, particularly in the city of Vancouver. Unparalleled achievement, but all that's being thrown away on the altar, to the false god of supply and demand. It seems obviously, I think from my emotions, you can see my reaction to that is quite negative. And I'm glad you asked the second question, which is the difference between the developer and the land speculator. Now, some in the audience today know that a lot of development corporations also make a lot of money in the land speculation aspect, that they're able to, and good for them, and proud of the ability to strategically locate a parcel and then, do whatever is necessary, hold it for a while, or get it rezoned, or do something with it that is smart to make it more valuable, so that the bottom line of the project many years in the future, when all the money finally comes back, is a positive one. So I understand that there are a lot that the real estate industry, as it's presently practiced, in many cases assumes that the development and the land speculation are part of the same thing. And again, that sort of wraps it around this neoclassical idea that the land and the building are actually the same factor of production. They are both capital. But they are actually, I would argue, different things. The building itself is a social good of great importance. The land speculation side of it, though, does not show up as being anything other than socially parasitic in terms of land of capital value going into rent, essentially, where it gets buried and it's no longer productive. That's certainly according to the classical economists' point of view. So if there were a way, I mean, there is a way. Some developers are not in the land speculation game. They buy the parcel and, you know, they put up the building, and God love them, because they have to compete against others in the industry who are taking advantage of the speculative side of it. So if there was a way that the public sector could make speculation less attractive, which is what these land lift taxes is really what I'm talking about, do make speculation less attractive, that would be good. The developers who develop downtown Vancouver, Yaletown, and so forth, I think in my conversations with them understood this. They understood that the land lift, taking 80% of the land value away from the deal, was not going to hurt them. In effect, it made their deal better because the context became a better context for their development projects. And the dominant developers, many of the developers then understood that there was only benefit in managing this land lift or this land price inflation in the context of that major project. So I'm not very hopeful about all this, but there might be a moment for the public or the listeners here who are an important constituency to weigh in on this one. I mean, I think people are depending on the real estate industry to weigh in on this one. And so far, the weighing in on it has been, in my view, quite negative by supporting the idea if only the impediments to supply were removed, prices would go down, and there is no evidence to support that, in my view.
Thank you for answering very well that complicated question. That was super helpful. Richard, is there time for a Q&A question?
I don't think we're going to have time for a question because we really do have to end on time. But I will say this. I've had a number of comments. Some of them are in the chat, the Q&A box. Some of them have come to me directly. Some of them came to me, a week or two before we even had Patrick on as a guest. Without agreeing or disagreeing with Patrick's contentions, Patrick's thesis, I can say that most of the comments I've read seem to reflect that people haven't fully absorbed Patrick's points in his book. And so I'm going to make a special offer to the first 25 individuals who email me, richard.joy@uli.org. It's on the website, richard.joy@uli.org, with the header Broken City, the title of Patrick's book. The first 25 people who email me with your address, I'll arrange to get a copy of that book sent to you at no charge. We'll pay for it. Because I'd really like a few people to absorb his book, and then maybe later down the line have a little more conversation about what we don't agree or do agree about what Patrick's saying. But I think there's something really very important in that book, and the fact that maybe we wouldn't all of us agree with everything is fine. But I think there's some very important points. And Patrick, that's by way of saying a very sincere thank you to you for bringing a perspective that may be tough and challenging and contrarian and some people said it's not contrarian. It's actually you're just simply saying what is the status quo. I found that interesting. In any event, I applaud you for bringing this book forward. Again, whether you agree or disagree with it, it's an important read. Charisse, thank you very, very much for not only reading the book, but drawing out, I think, some of the salient pieces. There's so much more detail in the book that we couldn't get to in 1 hour. So hence my offer. And with that, I'm going to just flip over to the next slide, just simply to say that there are some upcoming events, including this entire week-long event that I think are titles that follow our National Housing Week. How can real estate innovate? Is rental the new condo? Lessons from the United States, and broadening the toolkit of ideas. And I might bring in some of the ideas that you mentioned in the affordable housing overlay into that conversation on Friday. So it's 1 o'clock. With that, we end on time. Patrick, Charisse, thank you.
Thank you.